Do you ever change your cross-stitch needle, or do you perhaps just keep using the same one unless it actually breaks? This isn't a trick question, and there's no right or wrong answer here, but I did just want to give you some things to think about if you've been wondering when, or indeed how often, you should change your cross-stitch needle. Hi there, Stitchy friends. I'm Kat from Catkin and Lily, bringing you the best tips, tricks and tutorials so you can get the most joy from your cross-stitching. Now, I've seen a number of cross-stitchers wondering how long it's okay to keep using the same needle. And it's something I've thought about in the past, but hadn't really come to any firm conclusions. So I thought perhaps it was time to revisit this and figure out my needle plan once and for all. Let's set the scene by thinking about how needles are manufactured and what happens to them over time as we use them to cross-stitch. Generally, needles are made from a steel wire core that then has a coating of nickel put on top of that. And it may go one step further and have additional coatings put on top, such as platinum or gold. All of these coatings are relatively soft metals, so they will get damaged just a tiny little bit with every single stitch that you make. Whether that's becoming more blunt, getting slightly bent, the shaft becoming rougher or maybe slightly discoloured, or the inside of the eye of the needle becoming more worn and rough. All of that could reduce the ease and smoothness of your stitching and potentially make your stitches look less neat as well. So you may find that an older needle perhaps doesn't glide through the holes in the fabric as easily as it once did, or it's catching more on the fabric and threads as you stitch. And if the eye gets worn, then you may find that that can actually roughen up your threads as you stitch and increase the risk of knotting and tangling. The other thing that can happen to that soft coating as you stitch is that it may get worn off in places or all across the needle, and you may also see tarnishing. You might notice that as you use a needle over time, that you start to see duller patches along the shaft of the needle, or maybe even discolorations or black spots, particularly where you're holding it, and this is known as tarnishing. I haven't been able to properly find out whether this tarnishing is the coating being affected, or whether it's the coating being worn away such that the steel core underneath is exposed and that's what's tarnishing. Either way, it's just bad news, as a tarnished needle could discolour your thread or your fabric. So I would discard any needles once you see any sign of tarnishing. Now, I'm actually very lucky that I don't seem to have a huge problem with my needles tarnishing, but it is a big problem for a lot of cross-stitchers. The reason that needles tarnish is due to moisture and oils on your hands, and of course that's going to vary for everyone. Some people do just naturally have higher levels of moisture and oil in their hands and might find that needles tarnish more quickly for them. And unfortunately, this probably means you are going to need to change your needle more often. Now, if tarnishing is something that you do find to be a big problem, then I would highly recommend that you go and follow Tan, the Monogamous cross-stitcher, because she does have this problem and is currently doing some testing to find out which needles last the longest for her. So I think that's going to be incredibly useful for probably quite a lot of cross-stitchers. So I will pop a link to her in the description, so when she shares her results, then you'll be able to find out for yourself. Now, interestingly, gold is actually slightly softer than nickel. So if you want a needle that lasts longer, particularly in regard to tarnishing, then actually gold isn't necessarily a better option. I read a very interesting article by Lord Libiden that suggested that the gold coating on some needles may wear off as quickly as 5 or 6 hours of stitching, whereas for other brands of needle it may last 30 to 50 hours. So there can be quite a big difference there. Now, I'm going to be testing gold needles fairly soon, and I will include information on how long the gold coating lasted for me. So if you're interested in that, then watch this space. And of course, if you're watching this in the future, then go and check out my needles playlist to see if that video is already there. So I think we can agree that using a worn needle could very well affect the ease and appearance of your stitching. Therefore, it stands to reason that changing your needle regularly would be of benefit. But how do you know when? Well, it would be wonderful if I could tell you that a needle should be replaced after a certain number of stitches, but in reality, there's no hard and fast rule like that, and it probably depends on multiple different factors, many of which I may not even be aware of. I'm pretty sure needle manufacturing has something to do with it, and the longevity of a needle may well vary between different brands, but I don't have any evidence for this or for which brands might last longer. I do also wonder if factors such as using rougher threads, like metallic threads, or using a needle threader could increase the damage on the eye of the needle. But again, that's really just pure speculation. Okay, so what can we actually say about when it's a good idea to change your needle? Well, the first and extremely obvious situation when you would want to change your needle is if it actually breaks. I think that one's a little bit of a no-brainer. And similarly, as I've mentioned, if you can see any rough patches or any discoloration on your needle, I would get rid of that one as well. The next situation where you might decide to change your needle is where you're finding that the thread is starting to knot and tangle more for you. Perhaps your stitches just aren't looking as neat, they're just not sitting quite right, or perhaps you're finding it more difficult to thread your needle. All of that could indicate that there's been some fairly significant wear and tear on your needle and that it's time for a new one. Now, I realise that is still a wee bit vague, and I think this is why cross-stitchers do keep using the same needle for so long. It does feel kind of wasteful to throw away a needle that isn't broken or visibly damaged or tarnished in some way. There's also the cost to consider, but then I realised actually this is a little bit daft because needles are not expensive in the grand scheme of things. If you think about how much it costs for a cross-stitch kit, or to buy fabric, threads, the pattern, all of that, then actually the cost of a needle is a tiny fraction of all of that. So I've decided that I'm going to have a brand new needle for every medium to large sized cross-stitch project that I start. If it is a particularly large project, then I will also change my needle halfway through. Unless, as I'm stitching, I notice any change in how easy it is to stitch, or I'm noticing a reduction in the neatness of my stitching, and then I will immediately switch to a new needle. For small or very small projects, I think I could get away with using a needle for 2 projects. So I'll take a brand new needle and use it for one project, and then I'm going to use this magnetic needle case. I'll show you inside, and I will pop my needle into here once it's been used for a single project, and then I can take it out of there and use it for the second project, and then I'll throw it away. Now, it is of course really important that you dispose of needles safely, and I probably don't have all the answers on that front. But I would say if you're going to throw them away in general waste, just make sure that they are very well wrapped up or inside some kind of hard container. Now, in some places you may be able to put them into your household metal recycling, but I suspect probably not in most cases. Alternatively, you may be able to take them to your local household recycling centre to go into the metal scrap bin, but again, you'd have to check on that. Now, I work in a hospital, so I could actually potentially take my needles into work with me and pop them in a sharps bin. You may also be in a situation where you can access a sharps bin, in which case you could use that as well. I've found myself a small container that I can just pop all my used needles into, and then I can either throw that away in its entirety, or I can take them to the hospital and put them into the sharps bin. Now it's over to you, and I would be really curious to hear your thoughts on this topic, so please do leave me a comment letting me know what you do with your needles, how long you use them for, and perhaps if this video has changed your mind on that topic. If you found this video helpful, then I would be delighted if you would give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my future tips and tutorial videos. Thank you so much for watching, and happy stitching!